Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to thank Director Comey for being here and doing so on short notice. I have the greatest admiration for the FBI. My grandfather was a career FBI agent. I tell you, I'm here because we're mystified and confused by the fact pattern that you laid out and the conclusions that you reached. It seems that there are two standards, and there's no consequence for these types of activities and dealing in a careless way with classified information. It seems to a lot of us that the average Joe, the average American, that if they had done what you laid out in your statement, that they'd be in handcuffs. And they might be on their way to jail, and they probably should. And I think there is a legitimate concern that there is a double standard. If your name isn't Clinton, or you're not part of the powerful elite, that Lady Justice will act differently. It's a concern that Lady Justice will take off that blindfold and come to a different conclusion. Hillary Clinton created this mess. It wasn't Republicans, it wasn't anybody else. She made a very conscious decision. On the very day that she started her Senate confirmation, she set up and got a domain name and set up a system to avoid and bypass the safety, security, and the protocol of the State Department. Classified information is classified for a reason. It's classified because if it were to get out into the public, there are nefarious actors, nation states, others, that want to do harm to this country. And there are people who put their lives on the line, protecting and serving our country. And when those communications are not secure, it puts their lives in jeopardy. This classified information is entrusted to very few, but there is such a duty and an obligation to protect that, to fall on your sword to protect that. And yet there doesn't seem to be any consequence. You know, I was talking to Trey Gowdy, and he made a really good point with us yesterday. Mr. Gowdy said, you know, in your statement, Mr. Director, you mentioned that there was no precedent for this. But we believe that you have set a precedent, and it's a dangerous one. The precedent is if you sloppily deal with classified information, if you're cavalier about it, and it wasn't just an innocent mistake, this went on for years, that there's going to be no consequence. We're a different nation in the United States of America. We are self-critical. Most nations would never do this. But we do it in the spirit of making ourselves better. There'll be all kinds of accusations about political this and political that. I have defended your integrity every step of the way. You are the definitive voice. I stand by that. But I am mystified, and I am confused, because you listen to your fact pattern and come to the conclusion that there is no consequence. I don't know how to explain that. We'll have constituents ask us. They'll get mad. They'll pound it. You know, they're frustrated. They've seen this happen time and time again. I don't know how to explain it. And I hope that through this hearing, we can stick to the facts and understand this, because there does seem to be two standards. There does seem to be no consequence. And I want to understand that. And I want to be able to explain it to the person that's sitting at home. And that's why we're here. And so I yield back. Now I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Director Comey, thank you for being here today. I want to begin by commending you and the public servants at the FBI for the independent investigation you conducted. you had a thankless task. No matter what recommendation you made, you were sure to be criticized. There's no question that you were extremely thorough. In fact, some may even say you went too far in your investigation. But of course, that was your job. That is your job. Secretary Clinton has acknowledged that she made a mistake in using a personal email account. And you explained on Tuesday that she and her colleagues at the State Department were extremely careless with their emails. But after conducting this exhaustive review, you determined that no reasonable prosecutor would bring a case based on this evidence. And you and the career staff recommended against prosecution. Based on the previous cases you examined, if prosecutors had gone forward, they would have been holding the Secretary to a different standard from everyone else. Amazingly, some Republicans who were praising you just days ago for your independence, for your integrity, and your honesty instantly turned against you because your recommendation conflicted with the predetermined outcome they wanted. In their eyes, you had one job, and one job only: to prosecute Hillary Clinton. But you refused to do so. So now you are being summoned here to answer for your alleged transgressions. And in a sense, Mr. Director, you're on trial. Contrary to the claims of your critics, there is absolutely no evidence that you made your recommendation for political reasons, no evidence that you were bribed or coerced or influenced, no evidence that you came to your conclusion based upon anything but the facts and the law. I firmly believe that your decision was not based on convenience, but on conviction. Today, House Republicans are doing what they always do, using taxpayers' money to continue investigating claims that have already been debunked just to keep them in the headlines one more day. When they hear a political siren, they rush towards it over and over again, even if the evidence is not there. Exhibit A. Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, who admitted on national television that Republicans established the Benghazi Select Committee to bring down Secretary Clinton's poll numbers. I didn't say that. McCarthy said it. The fact was confirmed by a Republican staffer on that committee who reported that he was fired in part for not going along with the hyper-focus on Secretary Clinton. I give House Republicans credit. They certainly are not shy about what they are doing. They've turned political investigations into an art form. If our concerns here today are with the proper treatment of classified information, then we should start with a review of our previous hearing on General David Petraeus, who pled guilty last year to intentionally and knowingly compromising highly classified information. The problem is, Mr. Director, we never had that hearing. This committee ignored that breach of national security because it did not match the political goals of the House Republicans. If our concerns today were with finally addressing a broken classification system in which security levels are arbitrarily changed up and down, that would have been a legitimate goal. That would have been a valuable addition to reforming and improving our government. After all, we are the Government Reform Committee. We could have held hearings here on Zika, the Zika virus, preventing gun massacres like the one in Orlando, or a host of other topics that could actually save people's lives. But that's not why we're here. That is not why our chairman called this emergency hearing 48 hours after you made your recommendation. Everyone knows what this committee is doing. Honestly, I would not be surprised, and I say this with all seriousness, I would not be surprised if tomorrow Republicans set up a new committee to spend $7 million plus on why the FBI failed to prosecute Hillary Clinton. Director Comey, let me conclude with this request. Even with all that I have said, I believe that there is a critical role for you today. I've listened carefully to the coverage on this issue. And I've heard people say recently as this morning, 3 hours ago, that they were mystified by your decision. As a matter of fact, the chairman repeated it a minute ago. And so there is a perceived gap between the things you said on Tuesday and your recommendation. There's a gap, Mr. Director. So in this moment, and this is a critical moment, I beg you to fill the gap. Because when the gap is not filled by you, it will be filled by others. Share with us, the American people, your process and your thinking. Explain how you examine the evidence, the law, and the precedent. Describe in clear terms how you and your team, career professionals, arrived at this decision. If you can do that today, if you can do that, that could go a long way towards people understanding your decision. Finally, I want to make it clear that I condemn these completely unwarranted political attacks against you. They have attacked you personally. They have attacked your integrity. They have impugned your professionalism. And they have even suggested that you were somehow bought and paid for because you made your recommendation based upon the law and the facts. I know you are used to working in a world of politics, but these attacks have been beyond the pale. So you do not deserve this. Your family does not deserve it, and the highly skilled and dedicated agents of the FBI do not deserve it. I honor your professionalism and your service to our country. And again, even if it takes till hell freezes over, I beg you to close the gap. Tell us what happened between what you found and your decision so that not only the members of this panel and this Congress will understand, but so that Americans will understand. And if you do that, then it will be all worth it today. With that, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
I think, hold on one second. With your indulgence, to the ranking member, of which I have the greatest respect, you asked for a hearing on General Petraeus and how that was dealt with. You got it. We will have one in this Oversight Committee, and the record will reflect that in the Judiciary Committee, I repeatedly questioned Attorney General Holder. I repeatedly questioned the FBI director about the disposition of that case, probably more than any member in the House or Senate. And if you want a hearing, we'll do that.
Mr. Gentleman, you?
Yes.
Thank you.
Number two, you complained that we haven't done a hearing on Zika. The Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I believe, was the very first committee to actually do a hearing on Zika that was chaired by Mr. Micah. And I'm proud of the fact that we did a Zika hearing, and we did it first.
Gentleman yield?
Sure.
Can we have another one because the problem is still there?
Absolutely.
Big time. Thank
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I just unanimous consent request that we put the date of the hearing in the record at this time that I chaired. Thank you.
Absolutely.
On Zika.
And the ranking member knows that we have held multiple hearings on the criminal justice and criminal justice reform. You asked for it, you're passionate about it, and we did do that as well. So to suggest we haven't addressed some of those issues, I think is inaccurate.
I don't think I did that, Mr. Chairman, but again, as late as yesterday with the problem in Minnesota with an African-American man being killed, I'd like to have some hearings still on the criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank
do
you,
that?
gentlemen. Without objection, I'm going to work with you on that, as I
Thank
have
you.
every step of the way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate
Without
it.
objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. We'll hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our distinguished witness for our first panel. Pleased to welcome the Honorable James Comey, the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. We welcome Director Comey and thank you for being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are to be sworn before they testify. If you'll please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. Mr. Comey, the floor is yours. You can take as long or as short as you'd like. If you have any written statement that you would like to submit afterwards, we're happy to do that as well. It will be made part of the record. The time is now yours. Director Comey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cummings, members of the committee. I am proud to be here today representing the people of the FBI who did this investigation as they do all their work in a competent, honest, and independent way. I believe this investigation was conducted consistent with the highest traditions of the FBI. Our folks did it in an apolitical and professional way, including our recommendation as to the appropriate resolution of this case. As I said in my statement on Tuesday, I expected there would be significant public debate about this recommendation, and I'm a big fan of transparency, so I welcome the conversation we're going to have here today. And I do think a whole lot of folks have questions about, so why did we reach the conclusion we did, and what was our thinking? And I hope very much to get an opportunity to address that and to explain it. And I hope at the end of the day people can disagree, can agree, but they will at least understand that the decision was made and the recommendation was made the way you would want it to be, by people who didn't give a hoot about politics, but who cared about what are the facts, what is the law, and how have similar people, all people, been treated in the past. Maybe I could just say a few words at the beginning that would help frame how we think about this. There are 2 things that matter in a criminal investigation of a subject. What did the person do? And when they did that thing, what were they thinking? When you look at the 100 years plus of the Justice Department's investigation and prosecution of the mishandling of classified information, those 2 questions are obviously present. What did the person do? Did they mishandle classified information? And when they did it, did they know they were doing something that was unlawful? That has been the characteristic of every charged criminal case involving the mishandling of classified information. I'm happy to go through the cases in particular. In our system of law, there's a thing called mens rea. It's important to know what you did, but when you did it, this Latin phrase mens rea means, what were you thinking? And we don't want to put people in jail unless we prove that they knew they were doing something they shouldn't do. That is the characteristic of all the prosecutions involving mishandling of classified information. There is a statute that was passed in 1917 that on its face makes it a crime, a felony, for someone to engage in gross negligence. So that would appear to say, well, maybe in that circumstance, you don't need to prove they knew they were doing something that was unlawful. Maybe it's enough to prove that they were just really, really careless, beyond a reasonable doubt. At the time Congress passed that statute in 1917, there was a lot of concern in the House and the Senate about whether that was going to violate the American tradition of requiring that before you're going to lock somebody up, you prove they knew they were doing something wrong. And so there was a lot of concern about it. The statute was passed. As best I can tell, the Department of Justice has used it once in the 99 years since, reflecting that same concern. I know from 30 years with the Department of Justice, they have grave concerns about whether it's appropriate to prosecute somebody for gross negligence, which is why they've done it once that I know of in a case involving espionage. And so when I look at the facts we gathered here, as I said, I see evidence of great carelessness, but I do not see evidence that is sufficient to establish that Secretary Clinton or those with whom she was corresponding both talked about classified information on email and knew when they did it, they were doing something that was against the law. Right? So given that assessment of the facts, my understanding of the law, my conclusion was and remains, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. No reasonable prosecutor would bring the second case in 100 years focused on gross negligence. And so I know that's been a source of some confusion for folks. That's just the way it is. I know the Department of Justice. I know no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. I know a lot of my former friends are out there saying they would. I wonder where they were the last 40 years, because I'd like to see the cases they brought on gross negligence. Nobody would, nobody did. So my judgment was the appropriate resolution of this case was not with a criminal prosecution. As I said, folks can disagree about that, but I hope they know that view, not just my view, but of my team, was honestly held, fairly investigated, and communicated with unusual transparency because we know folks care about it. So I look forward to this conversation. I look forward to answering as many questions as I possibly can. I'll stay as long as you need me to stay because I believe transparency matters tremendously, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Director. I'm going to recognize myself here. Physically, where were Hillary Clinton's servers?
The operational server was in the basement of her home in New York. The reason I'm answering it that way is sometimes after they were decommissioned, they were moved to other facilities, storage facilities, but the live device was always in the basement.
Was that an authorized or unauthorized location?
It was an unauthorized location for the transmitting of classified information.
Is it reasonable or unreasonable to expect Hillary Clinton would receive and send classified information?
As Secretary of State, reasonable that the Secretary of State would encounter classified information in the course of the Secretary's work.
Via email?
Sure, depending upon the nature of the system. To communicate classified information would have to be a classified rated email system.
But you did find more than 100 emails that were classified that had gone through that server, correct?
Right, through an unclassified server, correct.
Yes. So Hillary Clinton did come to possess documents and materials containing classified information via email on these unsecured servers, correct?
That is correct.
Did Hillary Clinton lie?
To the FBI, we have no basis to conclude she lied to the FBI.
Did she lie to the public?
That's a question I'm not qualified to answer. I can speak about what she said to the FBI.
Did Hillary Clinton lie under oath?
Not to the FBI, not in a case we're working.
Did you review the documents where Congressman Jim Jordan asked her specifically, and she said, quote, "There was nothing marked classified on my emails, either sent or received," end quote.
I don't remember reviewing that particular testimony. I'm aware of that being said, though.
Did the FBI investigate her statements under oath on this topic?
Not to my knowledge. I don't think there's been a referral from Congress.
Do you need a referral from Congress to investigate her statements under oath?
Sure do.
You'll have one. You'll have one in the next few hours. Did Hillary Clinton break the law?
In connection with her use of the email server, my judgment is that she did not.
Did you just not able to prosecute it, or did Hillary Clinton break the law?
Well, I don't want to give an overly lawyerly answer. The question I always look at is there evidence that would establish beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody engaged in conduct that violated a criminal statute? And my judgment here is there is not.
The FBI does background checks. If Hillary Clinton applied for the job at the FBI, would the FBI give Hillary Clinton a security clearance?
I don't want to answer a hypothetical. The FBI has a robust process in which we adjudicate the suitability of people for employment in the Bureau.
Given the fact pattern you laid out less than 48 hours ago, would a person who had dealt with classified information like that, would that person be granted a security clearance at the FBI?
It would be a very important consideration in a suitability determination.
You're kind of making my point, Director. The point being, because I injected the word Hillary Clinton, you gave me a different answer. But if I came up to you and said that this person was extremely careless with classified information, the exposure to hostile actors, and used, despite warnings, created unnecessary burdens and exposure. If they said that they had one device and you found out that they had multiple devices, if there had been email chains with somebody like Jake Sullivan asking for classification changes, you're telling me that the FBI would grant a security clearance to that person?
I hope I'm giving a consistent answer. I'm not saying what the answer would be. I'm saying that would be an important consideration in a suitability determination for anybody.
And it's just Personally, I just think that sounds like a bit of a political answer, because I can't imagine that the FBI would grant a security clearance to somebody with that fact pattern. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Just say what I said before. Again, it's very hard to answer in the hypothetical. I'll repeat it. It would be a very important consideration in a suitability determination.
Did Hillary Clinton do anything wrong?
And what do you mean by wrong?
I think it's self-evident.
Well, I'm a lawyer, I'm an investigator, and hope a normal human being.
Do you really believe there should be no consequence for Hillary Clinton and how she dealt with this?
Well, I didn't say, I hope folks remember what I said on Tuesday. I didn't say there's no consequence for someone who violates the rules regarding the handling of classified information. There are often very severe consequences in the FBI involving their employment, involving their pay, involving their clearances. That's what I said on Tuesday, and I hope folks walk away understanding that just because someone's not prosecuted for mishandling classified information, that doesn't mean if you work in the FBI, there aren't consequences for it.
So if Hillary Clinton, or if anybody, had worked at the FBI under this fact pattern, what would you do to that person?
There would be a security review and an adjudication of their suitability, and a range of discipline could be imposed from termination to reprimand, and in between suspensions, loss of clearance. So you could be walked out, or you could, depending on the nature of the facts, you could be reprimanded. But there is a robust process to handle that.
I've gone past my time. I yield back. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Director Comey, and I want to thank you very much for being here today, especially on such short notice. You and your staff should be commended for the thorough and dedicated review you conducted. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues are now attacking you personally because your final recommendation conflicted with their preconceived political outcome in this case. Some have tried to argue that this case is far worse than the case of General David Petraeus, who was convicted in 2015 of knowingly and intentionally compromising highly classified information. In fact, one very vocal politician we all know said this, and I quote, "If she isn't indicted, the only reason is because the Democrats are protecting her. She is being protected 100%. Because you look at General Petraeus, you look at all the other people that did a fraction of what she did, but she has much worse judgment than he had, and she's getting away with it, and it's unfair to him," end of quote. Director Comey, you were the director of the FBI when General Petraeus pled guilty, is that right?
Yes.
If I understand that case correctly, General Petraeus kept highly classified information in 8 personal notebooks at his private residence. Is that correct?
That is correct.
According to the filings in that case, his notebook included the identities of covert officers. They also included war strategy, intelligence capabilities, diplomatic discussions, quotes and deliberative discussions from high-level National Security Council meetings, and discussions with the President. General Petraeus shared his information with his lover and then biographer. He was caught on audio tape telling her, and I quote, "I mean, they are highly classified, some of them. They don't have it on it, but I mean, there's code word stuff in there," end of quote. Director Comey, what did General Petraeus mean when he said he intentionally shared, quote, code word information with her? What does that mean?
The Petraeus case, to my mind, illustrates perfectly the kind of cases the Department of Justice is willing to prosecute. Even there, they prosecuted him for a misdemeanor. In that case, you had vast quantities of highly classified information, including special sensitive compartmented information. That's the reference to code words. Vast quantity of it, not only shared with someone without authority to have it, but we found it in a search warrant hidden under the insulation in his attic, and then he lied to us about it during the investigation. So you have obstruction of justice, you have intentional misconduct, and a vast quantity of information. He admitted he knew that was the wrong thing to do. That is a perfect illustration of the kind of cases that get prosecuted. In my mind, it illustrates, importantly, the distinction to this case.
And General Petraeus did not admit to these facts when the FBI investigators first interviewed him, did he?
No, he lied about it.
But he did admit to these facts in a plea agreement, is that correct?
Yes.
Here's what the department filing said about General Petraeus, and I quote, The acts taken by defendant David Howell Petraeus were in all respects knowing and deliberate and were not committed by mistake, accident, or other innocent reason, end of quote. Is that an accurate summary in your view, Director Comey?
Yes, it actually leaves out an important part of the case, which is the obstruction of justice.
Was he charged with obstruction of justice?
No.
And why not?
A decision made by the leadership of the Department of Justice not to insist upon a plea to that felony.
So the question is, do you agree with the claim that General Petraeus, and I quote, got in trouble for far less, end of quote? Do you agree with that statement?
No, it's the reverse.
And what do you mean by that?
His conduct, to me, illustrates the categories of behavior that mark the prosecutions that are actually brought. Clearly intentional conduct, knew what he was doing was a violation of the law. Huge amounts of information that even if you couldn't prove he knew it, it raises the inference that he did it, right? An effort to obstruct justice. That combination of things makes it worthy of a prosecution. A misdemeanor prosecution, but a prosecution nonetheless.
Sitting here today, do you stand by the FBI's recommendation to prosecute General Petraeus?
Oh, yeah.
Do you stand by the FBI's recommendation not to prosecute Hillary Clinton?
Oh, yes.
Director Comey, how many times have you testified before Congress about the General Petraeus case? Do you know?
I don't think I've ever testified. I don't think I've testified about it at all. I don't think so.
With that, I'll yield back.
I have to check the record, but I believe I asked you a question about it at the time, but maybe not.
Well, you could have. That's why I was.
Yeah,
that's why I was squinching my face. It could have been at a Judiciary Committee hearing. I was asked about it.
Yeah. We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Director Comey. Secretary Clinton said she never sent or received any classified information over her private email. Was that true?
Our investigation found that there was classified information sent.
So it was not true.
Right. That's what I said.
Okay. Well, I'm looking for a little shorter answer, so you and I are not here quite as long. Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails, either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true. There were a small number of portion markings on, I think, 3 of the documents.
Secretary Clinton said, I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
Now, there was classified material emailed.
Secretary Clinton said she used just one device. Was that true?
She used multiple devices during the 4 years of her term as Secretary of State.
Secretary Clinton said all work-related emails were returned to the State Department. Was that true?
No, we found work-related emails, thousands, that were not returned.
Secretary Clinton said neither she nor anyone else deleted work-related emails from her personal account. Was that true?
That's a harder one to answer. We found traces of work-related emails on devices or in Slack space, whether they were deleted or whether when a server was changed out, something happened to them. There's no doubt that there were work-related emails that were removed electronically from the email system.
Secretary Clinton said her lawyers read every one of the emails and were overly inclusive. Did her lawyers read the email content individually?
No.
Well, in the interest of time, and because I have a plane to catch tomorrow afternoon, I'm not going to go through any more of the false statements, but I am going to ask you to put on your old hat. False exculpatory statements, they are used for what?
Well, either for a substantive prosecution or for evidence of intent in a criminal prosecution.
Exactly. Intent and consciousness of guilt, right? Is that right?
Right.
Consciousness of guilt and intent. In your old job, you would prove intent, as you just referenced, by showing the jury evidence of a complex scheme that was designed for the very purpose of concealing the public record. And you would be arguing, in addition to concealment, the destruction that you and I just talked about, or certainly the failure to preserve. You would argue all of that under the heading of content. You would also be arguing the pervasiveness of the scheme, when it started, when it ended, and the number of emails, whether they were originally classified or up-classified. You would argue all of that under the heading of intent. You would also, probably under common scheme or plan, argue the burn bags of daily calendar entries or the missing daily calendar entries as a common scheme or plan to conceal. 2 days ago, Director, you said a reasonable person in her position should have known a private email was no place to send and receive classified information. You're right, an average person does know not to do that. This is no average person. This is a former First Lady, a former United States Senator, and a former Secretary of State that the President now contends is the most competent, qualified person to be president since Jefferson. He didn't say that in 2008, but he says it now. She affirmatively rejected efforts to give her a state.gov account. She kept these private emails for almost 2 years and only turned them over to Congress because we found out she had a private email account. So you have a rogue email system set up before she took the oath of office, thousands of what we now know to be classified emails, some of which were classified at the time. One of her more frequent email comrades was in fact hacked, and you don't know whether or not she was. And this scheme took place over a long period of time and resulted in the destruction of public records, and yet you say there is insufficient evidence of intent. You say she was extremely careless, but not intentionally so. You and I both know intent is really difficult to prove. Very rarely do defendants announce, on this date, I intend to break this criminal code section. Just to put everyone on notice, I am going to break the law on this date. It never happens that way. You have to do it with circumstantial evidence. Or if you're Congress and you realize how difficult it is to prove specific intent, you will formulate a statute that allows for gross negligence. My time is out, but this is really important. You mentioned there's no precedent for criminal prosecution. My fear is there still isn't. There's nothing to keep a future Secretary of State or President from this exact same email scheme or their staff. And my real fear is this. It's what the chairman touched upon. This double-track justice system that is rightly or wrongly perceived in this country. That if you are a private in the Army and you email yourself classified information, you will be kicked out. But if you are Hillary Clinton and you seek a promotion to Commander-in-Chief, you will not be. So what I hope you can do today is help the average person, the reasonable person you made reference to, the reasonable person understand why she appears to be treated differently than the rest of us would be. With that, I would yield back.
We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney.
Director, thank you for your years of public service. You have distinguished yourself as the Assistant U.S. Attorney for both the Southern District of New York and the Eastern District of Virginia. That's why you were appointed by President Bush to be the Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice, and why President Obama appointed you as the Director of the FBI in 2013. Despite your impeccable reputation for independence and integrity, Republicans have turned on you with a vengeance immediately after you announced your recommendation not to pursue criminal charges against Secretary Clinton. Let me give you some examples. Representative Turner said, and I quote, "The investigation by the FBI is steeped in political bias," end quote. Was your investigation steeped in political bias, yes or no?
No, it was steeped in no kind of bias.
Thank you. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, was even more critical. He accused you of not applying the law equally. He said your recommendation shows, and I quote, "The Clintons are living above the law. They're being held to a different set of standards. That is clearly what this looks like," end quote. How do you respond to his accusations that you held the Clintons to a different set of standards than anyone else? Did you hold them to a different standard or the same standard?
It's just not accurate. We try very hard to apply the same standard whether you're rich or poor, white or black, old or young, famous or not known at all. I just hope folks will take the time to understand the other cases because a lot of confusion out there about what the facts were of the other cases that I understand lead good people, reasonable people to have questions.
Senator Cruz also criticized you. He said that there are, and I quote, serious concerns about the integrity of Director Comey's decision. He stated that you, quote, you had rewritten a clearly worded federal criminal statute. Did you rewrite the law in any way or rewrite any statute?
No.
Now, I truly hesitate to mention the next one. But Donald Trump took these conspiracy theories to a totally new level. He said, and I quote, it was no accident that charges were recommended against Hillary the exact same day as President Obama campaigned with her for the first time. So did you plan the timing of your announcement to help Secretary Clinton's campaign event on Tuesday?
No. Timing was entirely my own. Nobody knew I was going to do it, including the press. I'm very proud of the way the FBI, nobody leaked that. We didn't coordinate it, didn't tell, just not a consideration.
Thank you. Mr. Trump also claimed that Secretary Clinton bribed the Attorney General with an extension of her job. And I guess this somehow affected your decision. I know it's a ridiculous question, but I have to ask it. Did you make your decision because of some kind of bribe to the Attorney General?
No.
I tell you, are you surprised, as I am, by the intensity of the attacks from the GOP on you after having made a decision, a thoughtful decision, an independent decision with the professional staff of the FBI?
I'm not surprised by the intense interest and debate. I predicted it. I think it's important that we talk about these things. They inevitably become focused on individual people. That's okay. We'll just continue to have the conversation.
I believe that what we're seeing today is that if the GOP does not like the results of an investigation or how it turns out, and we saw they originally were lauding you, the minute you made your announcement, they're now attacking you, the same people. And now I predict they'll be calling for more hearings, more investigations, all at the expense of the taxpayer. And they do this instead of working on what the American people really care about. They want Congress to focus on jobs, the environment, homeland security, the security of our nation, affordable child care, affordable college educations, and an economy that works and helps all people. I thank you for performing your job with distinction and the long history of your whole profession of integrity and independence. And thank you very much. My time has expired.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for being with us. On Tuesday, you said any reasonable person in Secretary Clinton's position should have known that an unclassified system was no place for these conversations. You said on Tuesday some of her emails bore classified markings, and you also said on Tuesday there were potential violations of the appropriate statutes. Now, I know a bunch of prosecutors back home would look at that fact pattern, look at that evidence. You even referenced it in your opening statement. Some of your friends in the prosecution business have been on TV saying they'd have looked at that same evidence and they would have taken it to a grand jury. But on Tuesday you said, and today in your opening statement you said, no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. And then in your statement Tuesday you cite factors that helped you make that decision and make that statement. And one of the factors you said was consider the context of a person's actions. Now, typically when I hear context in the course of a criminal investigation, it's from the defense side, not the prosecution side. It's at the end of the case after there's been a trial and a guilty verdict, and it's during the sentencing phase, mitigating circumstances. That's the context we typically think about, but you said it on the front end. You said consider the context of the person's actions, and so I'm curious, what does consider the context mean? Because a lot of Americans are thinking just what the chairman talked about in his opening statement, that there are two standards, one for we the people and one for the politically connected. A lot of folks I get the privilege of representing back in Ohio think that when you said consider the context, they think that's what Mr. Gowdy just talked about, the fact that she's former First Lady, former Secretary of State, former Senator. major party's nominee for the highest office in the land. And oh, by the way, her husband just met with the individual you work with at an airport in Arizona 5 days ago. So you said none of that influenced your decision, but tell us what consider the context means.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jordan. What I was trying to capture is the fact that the exercise of prosecutorial discretion is always a judgment call. It is in every single case. And among the things you consider are, what was this person's background? What was the circumstances of the offense? Were they drunk? Were they inflamed by passion? Was it somebody who had a sufficient level of education and training and experience that we can infer certain things from that, to consider the entire circumstances of the person's offense conduct and background? I did not mean to consider political context or things like that.
The entire circumstances, and Mr. Gowdy just talked about this scheme. Remember what she did, right? She sets up this unique server arrangement. She alone controls it. On that server, on that email system are her personal emails, her work-related emails, Clinton Foundation information, and now we know classified information. This gets discovered. We find out this arrangement exists. Then what happens? Her lawyers, her legal team decides which ones we get and which ones they get to keep. They made the sort on the front end. And then we find out the ones that they kept and didn't give to us, didn't give to the American people, didn't give to Congress, the ones they kept, they destroyed them. And you don't have to take my word, I'll take what you said on Tuesday. They deleted all emails that they did not return to the State Department, and the lawyers cleaned their devices in such a way as to preclude complete forensic recovery. Now that sounds like a fancy way of saying they hid the evidence, right? And you just told Mr. Gowdy thousands of emails fell into those categories. Now, that seems to me to provide some context to what took place here. Did Secretary Clinton's legal team, let me ask it this way. Did Secretary Clinton know her legal team deleted those emails that they kept from us?
I don't believe so.
Did Secretary Clinton approve those emails being deleted?
I don't think there was any specific instruction or conversation between the Secretary and her lawyers about that.
Did you ask that question?
Yes.
Did Secretary Clinton know that her lawyers cleaned devices in such a way as to preclude complete forensic recovery?
I don't believe that she did.
Did you ask that question?
Yes.
Do you see how someone could view the context of what she did? Set up a private system. She alone controlled it. She kept everything on it. We now know from Ms. Abedin's deposition that they did it for that very reason, so no one could see what was there, based on the deposition Ms. Abedin gave. And then when they got caught, they deleted what they had, and they scrubbed their devices. Is that part of the context in evaluating this decision?
Sure, sure. And understand what inferences can be drawn from that collection of facts, of course.
All right. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, I appreciate your conduct of this investigation in a nonpartisan way, in keeping with the sterling reputation which has led presidents of both parties to appoint you to highly placed law enforcement positions in our federal government. I want to say for the record that this hearing, where you call the prosecutor and Mr. Comey stands in the place of the prosecutor, because the Attorney General has accepted entirely the FBI's recommendations, where you call the prosecutor to give account for the decision to prosecute or not. A particular individual raises serious questions of separation of powers, and particularly when you're questioning the prosecutor's decision with respect to the decision to prosecute or not, a particular individual raises serious bill of attainder constitutional questions. These hearings are so often accusatory that they yield no guidance as to how to conduct business in the future. And that's the way it looks. It looks as though that is how this hearing is going. Now, of course, now everyone understands in the abstract why it is important for security reasons to use official government mail or email rather than private email if security matters are involved. And that's a very broad, wide proposition. Now, there are no rules, so far as I know, requiring members of Congress to use their as to how they use their official email accounts, whether involving security or not. The chairman of this committee lists his personal account, for example, on his business card. No one says that's wrong. I don't know if it's wrong or right, because there's no guidance. Federal agency employees, members of Congress often have secure information, or at least sensitive information that shouldn't be made public. Some of our members are on the Intelligence Committee or the Defense Committee or even this committee and may have such matters. Some of these matters may concern national security issues. I don't know, if something as sensitive as the itinerary, if you're going on a Codell, as to the route you are taking and where you will be, all that could be on people's personal emails. Of course, this is legislative branch, and I spoke of separation of powers. I'm not indicating that there should be a government-wide sense that is ordained from on high, but there ought to be rules that everybody understands about, especially after the Clinton episode, about the use of personal email. So I'd like your insight for guidance as far as other federal employees are concerned, or even members of Congress and their staff, because I think we could learn from this episode. So strictly from a security standpoint, do you believe that federal employees, staff, even members of Congress should attempt guidance on the issue of the use of personal emails versus some official form of communication? What should we learn from the process the Secretary has gone through? I'm sure there will be questions about how there was even confusion, for example, in the State Department. But what should we learn when it comes to our own use of email or the use of federal employees on this question?
May I answer, Mr. Chairman? The most important thing to learn is that an unclassified email system is no case for an email conversation about classified matters. And by that I mean either sending a document as an attachment over unclassified email that is classified, or having a conversation about something that is a classified subject on an unclassified email system. That's the focus of the concern. That's the focus of this investigation. That it was also a personal email adds to the concern about the case because of the security vulnerabilities associated with a personal system. But the root of the problem is people using unclassified systems to conduct business that is classified. And so all of us should have access to, if we have access to classified information, classified communication systems. Right? The FBI has 3 levels: unclassified system, a secret system, and a top secret system. You can email on all 3, but you need to make sure you don't email on the unclass system, even if that's a government classified system, about matters that are classified. That's the important lesson to learn. Everybody ought to be aware of it. Everybody ought to be trained on it. We spend a lot of time training on it in the FBI to make sure folks are sensitive to the need to move a classified discussion, even if it doesn't involve sending a document, to the appropriate forum.
Members of Congress included.
Of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis, for 5 minutes.
Director, and the reason why that's so important is because if top secret information is compromised, that could damage our national security, correct?
Yes, by definition.
And American lives are at stake in some instances, correct?
Yes.
You mentioned a lot of people are upset that there are no consequences for Secretary Clinton, but in your statement you did point out that administrative and security consequences would be appropriate if someone demonstrated extreme carelessness for classified information. So those consequences, that would include potentially termination of federal employment?
Correct.
It could include revocation of security clearance?
Yes.
And it could include ineligibility for future employment in national security positions, correct?
It could.
Now, would you, as the FBI director, allow someone in the employ of your agency to work in a national security capacity if that person had demonstrated extreme carelessness in handling top secret info?
The best answer to that is we would look very closely at that in a suitability determination. It's hard to answer in the abstract, yes in all cases, no in all cases, but it would be a very important suitability scrub.
So there would be instances where someone could be extremely careless but still maintain confidence? I mean, we have a lot of people who are very competent in this country who would love to work for your agency, but yet it would be potentially you would allow somebody to be extremely careless and continue on?
That's the trouble with answering the hypothetical. I could imagine if it was a long time ago and it was a small amount of conduct or something, that's why it's hard to say other than it would be a very important part of
Let's
the
just put it this way. Would being extremely careless in handling top secret information expose an employee of the FBI to potential termination?
Yes.
Why shouldn't U.S. officials use mobile devices when traveling to foreign countries, especially if they're discussing classified or sensitive information?
Because the mobile device will transmit its signal across networks that are likely controlled or at least accessed by that hostile power.
And that's the guidance that the FBI gives all officials when they're traveling overseas. That's still good guidance, correct?
That's good guidance.
How did top secret information end up on the private server? Because your statement addressed Secretary Clinton. You did not address any of her aides in your statement. Attorney General Lynch exonerated everybody. That information just didn't get there on its own. So how did it get there? Were you able to determine that?
Yes, by people talking about a top secret subject in an email communication.
So
it's not about forwarding a top secret document. It's about having a conversation about a matter that is top secret.
And those were things that were originated by Secretary Clinton's aides and then sent to her, which was obviously being her server, but it was also included Secretary Clinton originating those emails, correct?
That's correct. In most circumstances, it initiated with aides starting a conversation. In the one involving top secret information, Secretary Clinton, though, also not only received but also sent emails that talked about the same subject.
And of that top secret information that you found, would somebody who was sophisticated in those matters, should it have been obvious to them that that was very sensitive information?
Yes.
So I guess my issue about knowledge of what you're doing is, in order for Secretary Clinton to have access to top secret SCI information, didn't she have to sign a form with the State Department acknowledging her duties and responsibilities under the law to safeguard this information?
Yes. Anybody who gets access to SCI, sensitive compartmented information, would sign what's called a read-in form that lays that out. I'm sure members of Congress have seen the same thing.
And it stresses in that document, and other training people would get, that there are certain requirements to handling certain levels of information. For example, a top secret document, that can't even be on your secret system at the FBI, correct?
Correct.
So you have to follow certain guidelines. And I guess my question is she's a very sophisticated person. She did execute that document, correct?
Yes.
And her aides who were getting the classified information, they executed similar documents to get a security clearance, correct?
I believe so.
And she knowingly, clearly set up her own private server in order to, well, actually, let me ask you that. Was the reason she set up her own private server in your judgment because she wanted to shield communications from Congress and from the public?
I can't say that. Our best information is she set it up as a matter of convenience. It was an already existing system that her husband had, and she decided to have a domain on that system.
So the question is very sophisticated. This is information that clearly anybody who had knowledge of security information would know that it would be classified. But I'm having a little bit trouble to see, how would you not then know that that was something that was inappropriate to do.
Well, I just want to take one of your assumptions about sophistication. I don't think that our investigation established that she was actually particularly sophisticated with respect to classified information and the levels and the treatment. And so far as we can tell,
Isn't she an original classification authority, though?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good grief. Well, I appreciate you coming, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record two documents that Mr. DeSantis referred to. One is the sensitive compartmented information non-disclosure agreement. The other one is the classified information non-disclosure agreement, both signed by Hillary Rodham Clinton. Without objection, so ordered. Now recognize the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Comey, for being here today and for the professionals whom you lead at the FBI. 2 years ago, after my urgent request to then former Attorney General Eric Holder for an expedited Justice Department investigation into the tragic death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, I witnessed firsthand the diligence, professionalism, and absolute integrity of your investigators. And I have no doubt that was the case in this matter as well. I did not think it was possible for the majority to exceed their unprecedented, arrogant abuse of official channels and federal funds that we have witnessed over the past 2 years, as they have engaged in a partisan political witch hunt at taxpayer expense against Secretary Clinton. But I was wrong. This proceeding is just a sequel to that very bad act, and the taxpayers will get the bill. It's a new low, and it violates both House rules and the rules of this committee. So with apologies to you and the FBI for this blatantly partisan proceeding, let me return to the facts of this case as you have clearly outlined them. First question, did Secretary Clinton or any member of her staff intentionally violate federal law?
We did not develop clear evidence of that.
Did Secretary Clinton or any member of her staff attempt to obstruct your investigation?
We did not develop evidence of that.
In your opinion, do the mistakes Secretary Clinton has already apologized for and expressed regret for rise to a level that would be worthy of federal prosecution?
As I said Tuesday, our judgment, not just mine, but the team's judgment at the FBI, is that the Justice Department would not bring such a case. No Justice Department under any, whether Republican or Democrat administration.
Thank you for that response. I know the FBI pays particular attention to groups by training agents and local law enforcement officers and participating in local hate crime working groups. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Some of these organizations seem relatively harmless, but others appear to be very dangerous and growing. Some even promote genocide in their postings and rhetoric online. In your experience, how dangerous are these groups, and have they incited violence in the past?
I think too hard to answer, Congressman, in the abstract. There are some groups that are dangerous. There are some groups that are exercising important protected speech under the First Amendment.
Okay, let me ask about a more direct question. A gentleman named Andrew Anglin is the editor of a website called The Daily Stormer that is dedicated to the supremacy of the white race as well as attacking Jews, Muslims, and others. The website features numerous posts with the hashtag white genocide to protest what they contend is an effort to eliminate the white race. Are you familiar with this movement?
I'm not.
Okay. Well, this hashtag has been promoted all over social media by a growing number of white supremacists. For example, one Nazi sympathizer tweeted repeatedly using the handle @WhiteGenocideTM Are you concerned that some groups are increasing their followers in this way, particularly if some of those followers could become violent?
I don't know the particular enough to comment, Congressman. We are always concerned when people go beyond protected speech, which we do not investigate, to moving towards acts of violence. And so our duty is to figure out when have people walked outside the First Amendment protection and are looking to kill folks or hurt folks. But I don't know enough to comment on the particular.
I see. Well, one of my biggest concerns is that certain public figures are actually promoting these dangerous groups even further. And as you may know, one of our most vocal candidates for president retweeted at White Genocide TM. 3 weeks later, he did it again. 2 days after that, he retweeted a different user whose image also included the term white genocide, and that's not even all of them. Director Comey, don't these actions make it easier for these racist groups to recruit even more supporters?
I don't think I'm in a position to answer that in an intelligent way sitting here.
Well, I appreciate you trying, and thank you, Mr. Director, for your exceptional and principled service to our country. I yield back.
Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Lummis, for 5 minutes.
Welcome, Director, and thank you so much for being here. My phone has been ringing off the hook in my Washington office, in my Wyoming office, from constituents who don't understand how this conclusion was reached. So I appreciate your being here to help walk us through it. And here's the issue that the people that are calling me from Wyoming are having. They have access to this statute. It's Title 18, U.S. Code 1924, and I'm going to read you this statute. It says, whoever being an officer, employee, contractor, or consultant to the United States, and by virtue of his office, employment, position, or contract, becomes possessed of documents or materials containing classified information of the United States, knowingly removes such documents or materials without authority and with the intent to retain such documents or materials at an unauthorized location, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for not more than 1 year or both. Armed with that information, they're wondering how Hillary Clinton, who is also an attorney, and attorneys are frequently held to a higher standard of knowledge of the law, how this could not have come to her attention. She was the Secretary of State. Of course the Secretary of State is going to become possessed of classified materials. Of course she was attorney. She practiced with a prominent Arkansas law firm, the Rose Law Firm. She knew from her White House days with her husband, the president, the classified materials can be very dangerous if they get into the wrong hands. She had to have known about this statute because she had to have been briefed when she took over the job as the Secretary of State. So how, given that body of knowledge and experience, could this have happened in a way that could have potentially provided access by hackers to confidential information?
No, it's a good question, a reasonable question. The protection we have as Americans is that the government, in general and in that statute in particular, has to prove before they can prosecute any of us that we did this thing that's forbidden by the law, and that when we did it, we knew we were doing something that was unlawful. We don't have to know the code number, but that we knew we were doing something that was unlawful. That's the protection we have, and it's one I've worked for very hard. When I was in the private sector, I did a lot of work with the Chamber of Commerce to stop the criminalization of negligence in the United States.
You know, though, may I interrupt and suggest that this statute says knowingly remove such documents or materials without authority and with the intent to retain such documents or materials at an unauthorized location. The intent here in the statute is to retain the documents at an unauthorized location. It's not intent to pass them on to a terrorist or to someone out in internet land. It's just the intent to retain the documents or materials at an unauthorized location.
Yeah, it's more than that, though. You'd have to show that and prove criminal intent, both by law, that's the way the judge would instruct a jury, and practice of the Department of Justice. They have reserved that statute, even though it's just a misdemeanor, for people who clearly knew they were breaking the law, and that's the challenge. So should have known, must have known, had to know, does not get you there. You must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they knew they were engaged in something that was unlawful.
Okay,
that's
then,
the challenge.
May I turn to her attorneys? Did all of Secretary Clinton's attorneys have the requisite clearances at the time they received all of her emails, especially those that were classified at the time they were sent?
No.
They destroyed, as has been noted, 30,000 emails of Secretary Clinton's. Do you have 100% confidence that none of the 30,000 emails destroyed by Secretary Clinton's attorneys was marked as classified?
I don't have 100% confidence. I'm reasonably confident some of them were classified. There were only 3 in the entire batch we found that bore any markings that indicated they were classified. So that's less likely, but surely it's a reasonable assumption that some of the ones they deleted contain classified information.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Comey, for appearing here to help the committee with this work. Director Comey, Secretary Clinton is certainly not the only Secretary of State to use a personal email account with information later identified as being classified. I just want to show you, this is a book that was written by former Secretary of State Colin Powell. And in his book, he says, to complement the official State Department computer in my office, I installed a laptop computer and on a private line. My personal email account on the laptop allowed me to direct access to anyone online. So I started shooting emails to my principal assistants, to individual ambassadors, and increasingly to my foreign minister colleagues who, like me, were trying to bring their ministries into the 186,000 miles per second world. Were you aware of this, that Secretary Colin Powell actually had a private server as well?
Not a private server. I think he used a commercial email account for State Department business.
Private line, unprotected.
Correct. Not a State Department email system.
Right, right. He went rogue, so to speak. Right?
I don't know whether I'd say that.
Yeah, all right. Okay, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Okay. But do you think this was careless for him to do that, to start, get his own, he got his own system. He installed a laptop computer on a private line. My personal email account was on a laptop and allowed me direct access to anyone online. That's his own statement. I'm just trying to compare secretaries of state, because Secretary Powell's never been here. Matter of fact, when we asked him for his emails, unlike the 55,000 that we received from Secretary Clinton, he said, "I don't have any to turn over." This is a quote. This was on ABC's This Week. He explained, "I don't have any to turn over. I didn't keep a cache of them. I did not print them off. I do not have thousands of pages somewhere in my personal files." But he was Secretary of State, and he operated on a private system. Were you aware of that?
Yeah, not at the time, 15 years ago, but I am now.
Yeah. Okay. So recently, well, back in October 2015, the State Department sent Secretary Powell a letter requesting that he contact his email provider, AOL, to determine whether any of his emails are still on the unclassified systems. Are you aware of that ongoing investigation?
I don't know of an investigation.
Well, that request for information from Secretary Powell, former Secretary.
Yes, I am.
You're aware of that. Are you surprised that he has never responded?
I don't know enough to comment. I don't know exactly what conversation he had with the State Department.
All right. I'm trying to look at the, where we have a lot of comparisons in other cases, and it seems like all the cases where prosecutions have gone forward, The subject of the investigation has demonstrated a clear intent to deliver classified information to a person or persons who were unauthorized to receive that. So if you look at the, PFC Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, that was a court-martial, but he demonstrated a clear intent to publish that information, which was classified. Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks editor, I guess, and publisher, again, a wide and deliberate attempt to publish classified information. General Petraeus, which we talked about earlier today, shared information with his biographer. Jeffrey Sterling, sending stuff to the New York Times. Former CIA officer Kiriakou, who was interested in writing a book, so he hung on to his information. And even former director of the CIA, John Deutsch, who retained classified information on a couple of servers, one in Belmont, Massachusetts, and one in Bethesda, Maryland. And that was after he became a private citizen. So in all those cases, there's a clear intent. As you said before, you look at what people did and what they were thinking when they did that. And I would just ask you, is there a clear distinction between what those people did and what Secretary Clinton did in her case?
In my view, yes. The Deutsch case illustrates it perfectly. And he took huge amount of documents, almost all at the TS-SCI level, had them in hard copy at his house, had them on an unclassed system connected to the internet, attempted to destroy some of them when he got caught, admitted, I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing this. So you have clear intent, huge amounts of documents, obstruction of justice. Those are the kind of cases that get prosecuted. That's what I said when I meant it when I said it. In my experience, which is 3 decades, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. I know that frustrates people, but that's the way the law is, and that's the way the practice is of the Department of Justice.
All right, thank you for your testimony and for your service. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now go to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, thank you. There's been much said today about criticizing you and your service. And I want to go on record that even though many of my constituents would love for me to criticize your service because of the conclusion you reach, never have I, nor will I, criticize your service, and we appreciate your service to this country and the integrity. So I'm going to focus on the things that you said, not the conclusion that you drew. And Congressman Trey Gowdy and I talked a little bit about this, but on February 4th, 2016, Secretary Clinton, during a presidential debate, said, I never sent or received any classified material. They are retroactively classifying it, close quote. And so in your statement on July 5th, you said that there were indeed 110 emails, 52 email chains, which there was classified information on it at the time it was sent or received. So those two statements, both of them cannot be true. Is that correct? Your statement and her statement.
Yeah, it's not accurate to say that she did not send or receive classified.
So she did not tell the truth during that presidential debate that she never sent or received classified information and that it was retroactively classified.
Yeah, I don't think that's a question I should be answering. What was in
Well,
her head during...
either your statement's not true or hers is not true. Both of them cannot be true. So is your statement true?
That I can speak to. My
Okay,
statement...
your statement is true, so the American people will have to judge with her statement not being true. So let me go on to another one. On October 22nd, she said there was nothing marked classified on emails either sent or received. And in your statement, you said a very small number of emails contain classified information, bore markings indicating the presence of classified information at the time. So she makes a statement that says there was no markings. You make a statement that there was, so her statement was not true.
Well, that one actually have a little bit of insight into her statement because we asked her about that. There were 3 documents that bore portion markings where you're obligated when something is classified to put a marking on that paragraph.
Right.
And there were 3 that bore C in parens, which means that's confidential classified information.
So a reasonable person who has been a senator, a secretary of state, a first lady, wouldn't a reasonable person know that that was a classified marking as a Secretary of State?
Yeah.
A reasonable person. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah, before this investigation, I probably would have said, yes, I'm not so sure. I don't find it incredible.
Director Comey, come on. I mean, I've only been here a few years, and I understand the importance of those markings. So you're suggesting that a long length of time that she had no idea what a classified marking would be? That's your sworn testimony today?
No, not that she would have no idea what a classified marking would be, but it's an interesting question as to whether this question about sophistication came up earlier, whether she was actually sophisticated enough to understand what a C in parens means.
So you're saying this former Secretary of State is not sophisticated enough to understand a classified marking?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's a huge statement.
I know what I'm saying. You asked me, did I assume that someone would know? Probably before this investigation I would have. I'm not so sure of that answer any longer. I think it's possible that she didn't understand what a C meant when she saw it in the body of an email like that. It's possible.
After years in the Senate and Secretary of State, I mean, that's hard for me and the American people to believe, Director Comey, and I'm not questioning your analysis of it, but wouldn't a reasonable person think that someone who has the highest job of handling classified information understand that?
I think that's a conclusion a reasonable person would draw. It may not be accurate, but
so
that's what
in that, let me go a little bit further, because that last quote actually came on October 22nd, 2015, under sworn testimony before the Benghazi Committee. So if she gave sworn testimony that a reasonable person would suggest was not truthful, isn't it a logical assumption that she may have misled Congress, and we need to look at that further?
Well, the reasonable person test is not what you look at for perjury or false statements. But like I said, I can understand why people would ask that question.
All right, so let me, in the last little portion of this, in your 3.5-hour interview on Saturday, did she contradict some of these public statements in private? Because you said she didn't lie to the FBI, but it's apparent that she lied to the American people. So did she change her statements in that sworn testimony with you last Saturday?
I haven't gone through that to parse that.
Can you do that and get back to this committee? Because it's important, I think, to the American people and to transparency.
Oh, I'm sure. And as the chairman and I have talked about, I'm sure the committee is going to want to see the documents in our investigation and whatnot, and we'll work to give you whatever we can possibly give you under our law. But I haven't done that analysis at this point.
Will you get that back to us?
Gentleman's time has expired. And we'll now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cooper, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Comey. I hate to see one of America's most distinguished public servants pilloried before this committee. We're all highly partisan here. We're good backseat drivers. We're all today, apparently, armchair prosecutors. And you stated the truth when you said that you didn't know of anyone who would bring a case like this. And some of the prosecutors have had decades to do that. I hope that this committee's effort is not intended to intimidate you or the FBI or law enforcement in general or government employees. And I'm thankful at this moment that you have such a lifetime record of speaking truth to power, because that's very important. It's also very important that apparently you're a lifelong Republican. You're just here to do your job, to state the facts. I think the key issue here is whether, in fact, there's a double standard, whether some Americans are being treated differently than others. And I think I can rely on my Republican colleagues to make sure that Hillary Clinton's treated no better than anybody else. There should be some attention given to make sure that she's not treated any worse than anybody else. I think we all know that we wouldn't be having this hearing, especially on an emergency basis, unless she were running for president. My colleague from Massachusetts has just pointed out that previous secretaries of state are not being called on the carpet, whether that be Condoleezza Rice or Colin Powell or others. But I think the grossest double standard here today is the fact that all the members of this committee, every member of Congress, is not subject to the same law that Secretary Clinton was subject to. And as lawmakers, that means that we have exempted ourselves from the standard of other federal employees. My colleague from D.C., Ms. Norton, referred to this. Why did we exempt ourselves from the same rules? Apparently, our chairman lists his private email account on his business card. We all have access to classified information. So I would like to challenge my Republican colleagues here today. Let's work together and introduce legislation to make the same laws apply to us as apply to the executive branch and to Secretary Clinton. I would be happy to join in such legislation to make sure that we're not being hypocritical on this panel, that we're holding ourselves to the same standards as Secretary Clinton, and not trying to accuse her of things that we may be guilty of ourselves. I bet my colleagues would be the first to complain if, for example, emails were retroactively classified. That's a situation that most people in public service would object to pretty strongly. How did you know at the time if you had no idea? So I think it's very important, if we want, as Congress, to have the trust of the American people, to not be hypocritical, to uphold the same standards that we want to see upheld by others. And I'm just thankful at this moment in our history that we have someone like you who's in charge of the FBI. Because too many things are highly politicized. The last thing we should do is criminalize our political system. I didn't see any of my Republican colleagues complain when former Governor Bob McDonnell was exonerated by an 8-0 vote of the Supreme Court for having done certain things that I think most Americans would find highly objectionable. But our court, on a bipartisan, unanimous basis, exonerated him just a week or two ago. So I think this is a moment for committee members to reflect, to take a deep breath, to calm down, and realize exactly what you said, that no reasonable prosecutor would have brought this case. And thank you for stating that so clearly and publicly. I yield back the balance. I yield to the ranking member.
Mr. Director, let me ask you this. First of all, I associate myself with everything the gentleman just said. You were talking about some markings a little bit earlier, is that right? Can you describe what those markings are like? Markings on documents. I think you said there were 3 documents with certain markings on them that indicated classified. Go ahead.
There were three emails that down in the body of the email, in the 3 different emails, there were paragraphs that at the beginning of the paragraph had a parenthesis, a capital C, and then a parenthesis. And that is a portion marking to indicate that
that
paragraph is classified at the confidential level, which is the lowest level of classification.
And so out of the 30,000 documents, you found these 3 markings? Is that what you're saying?
3 emails bore C markings down in the body. None of the emails had headers, which is at the top of a document that says it's classified. 3 had within the body the portion marking for C.
Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. And now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Meadows mentioned one instance in which Secretary Clinton said that she did not mail any classified material to anyone. Actually, she said that several other times. But it is accurate, Director Comey, that you found at least 110 instances of when she had emailed classified material.
110 that she either received or sent.
Right. And it also is accurate that, quote, Clinton's lawyers cleaned their devices in such a way as to preclude complete forensic recovery.
Correct.
And also, when Secretary Clinton said that nothing she sent was marked classified, and you said in your press conference, but even if information is not marked classified in an email, particularly our participants who know or should know that the subject matter is classified are still obligated to protect it. Do you feel that Secretary Clinton knew or should have known that she was obligated to protect classified information?
Yes.
With her legal background and her long experience in government. Also, she said at one point that she has directed all emails, work-related emails, to be forwarded to the State Department. is it also accurate that you discovered thousands of other emails that were work-related other than the 30,000 that she submitted?
Correct.
Before I came to Congress, I spent several years as a criminal court judge. Presided over several hundred felony criminal cases. And I can assure you that I saw many cases where the evidence of criminal intent was flimsier than the evidence in this case. But do you realize, or do you realize that great numbers of people across this country felt that you presented such an incriminating case against Secretary Clinton in your press conference that they were very surprised or even shocked when you reached the conclusion to let her off? Do you doubt that great numbers feel that way?
No, I think so, and I understand the questions. And I wanted to be as transparent as possible. We went at this very hard to see if we could make a case, and I wanted the American people to see what I honestly believed about the whole thing.
Well, do you understand, as the chairman said earlier, that great numbers of people feel now that there's one standard of justice for the Clintons and another for regular people?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. It's not true, but I've heard it a lot.
Well, even the ranking member who was here, who of course, as we understand, had to defend Secretary Clinton as strongly as possible, he almost begged you to explain the gap between the incriminating case that you presented and the conclusion that was reached. Did that surprise you, that he felt so strongly that there was this big gap?
No, not at all. No, it's a complicated matter. It involves understanding how the Department of Justice works across decades, how prosecutorial discretion is exercised. I get that folks see disconnection, especially when they see a statute that says gross negligence. Well, the director just said she was extremely careless, so how is that not prosecutable? So it takes an understanding of what's gone on over the last 99 years. What's the precedent? How do we treat these cases? I totally get people's questions, and I think they're in good faith.
Do we talk about gross negligence here, and you said that Secretary Clinton was extremely careless with this classified material and how dangerous it could be, how threatening to even to people's lives that it could be to disclose classified material. Do you agree that there is a very thin line between gross negligence and extreme carelessness? And would you explain to me what you consider to be that difference?
Sure, Judge. Congressman, as a former judge, you know there isn't actually a great definition in the law of gross negligence. Some courts interpret it as close to willful, which means you know you're doing something wrong. Others drop it lower. My term, extremely careless, is I'm trying to be kind of an ordinary person. That's a common sense way of describing it. Sure looks real careless to me. The question of whether that amounts to gross negligence, frankly, is really not at the center of this, because when I look at the history of the prosecutions and see it's been one case brought on a gross negligence theory, I know from 30 years there's no way anybody at the Department of Justice is bringing a case against John Doe or Hillary Clinton for the second time in 100 years based on those facts.
You ended your statement to Congressman Cooper a while ago saying once again that no reasonable prosecutor could have brought this case, yet you also mentioned earlier today that you had seen several of your friends and other prosecutors who've said publicly, many across this country, that they would have been glad to prosecute this case.
I smile because they're friends, and I haven't talked to them. I want to say, guys, so where were you over the last 40 years? Where were these cases? They just have not been brought. For reasons that I said earlier, it's a good thing that the Department of Justice worries about prosecuting people for being careless. I don't like it. As a citizen, I want people to show they knew they were breaking the law, and then we'll put you in jail.
Of course, you know many people have been prosecuted for gross negligence by the federal government, by the FBI.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and welcome, Director Comey. And although our politics are different, I gather you're a Republican. Is that correct?
I have been registered Republican for most of my adult life.
All right.
I'm not registered any longer.
We don't register by party in Virginia, but many have suspected my politics as being Democratic. And I thank you for your integrity. As my colleague said, and I said in my opening statement, your career has been characterized as speaking truth to power. And you're doing it again today. Just to set the context, Director Comey, not that you're unaware of this, today's hearing is political theater. There's not even the pretense of trying to get at the truth. This is a desperate attempt under an extraordinary set of circumstances, an emergency hearing. I don't know what the emergency is other than one side is about to nominate somebody who is a pathological narcissist who, is talking about banning Muslims and Mexicans crossing the border who are all rapists and women who are pigs, and terrified at the prospect of the consequences of that in the election. So let's grab onto whatever we can to discredit or try to discredit the other nominee, putative nominee. And you took away their only hope. And so the theater today is actually trying to discredit you. Subtly, in some cases. My friend from South Carolina uses big words like exculpatory and kind of goes through what a prosecutor would do. The insinuation being, you didn't do your job. My friend from Wyoming is apparently flooded with citizens in her home state who are reading the statute that governs classification. A lot of time on the hands back there, I guess, but yeah, this is all designed to discredit your finding. Now, the FBI interviewed Secretary Clinton, is that correct?
Yes.
Did she lie to the FBI in that interview?
I have no basis for concluding that she was untruthful with us.
And is it a crime to lie to the FBI?
Yes, it is.
David Petraeus did lie to the FBI.
Yes. Yes.
And he was prosecuted for that. Well, could have been.
Could have been, was not for that.
Right. That's always a judgment call.
Correct.
Was she evasive?
I don't think the agents assessed she was evasive.
How many emails are we talking about, total, universe, that were examined by your team?
Tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands. And how many are in a questionable category that maybe coulda, shoulda been looked at more carefully because there could be some element of classification? Apparently my friend from North Carolina assumes we're all intimately familiar with the fact that if a C appears, it means a classification, though there seems to be some dispute about that because the State Department, as I understand it, has actually said some of those were improperly marked and shouldn't have had the C. Aware of that?
Yes.
Yes. So could it be that in her 100-trip, 4 years, 100 overseas trips to 100 countries, as Secretary of State trying to restore U.S. credibility that had been destroyed in the previous 8 years overseas, and tens of thousands of email communications, not including phone calls and classified conversation and SCIFs and the like, that maybe the small percentage of emails, she didn't pay as much attention to them as maybe, in retrospect, one would hope she would have. Is that a fair conclusion? Could that be a fair conclusion?
I don't usually deal in maybes. It's possible.
Well, you do deal in distinguishing between willful and inadvertent.
Sure.
And in this case, you concluded it has to be in the latter category. It wasn't willful.
We concluded there was not adequate evidence of willful conduct.
Right. So there's no obfuscation here, unlike the Petraeus case. And there's no evasion. There's no lying. There's no willful intent to compromise classified material, despite the insinuations of my friends on the other side of the aisle. And the only hope left in this political theater is to discredit you and your team in the hopes that, therefore, you won't have credibility and we can revisit this monstrous crime of using a private server, that server being the server of the former President of the United States that maybe Mrs. Clinton thought would be more secure than the leaky system at the State Department. I yield back.
Now I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm offended. I'm offended by my friends on the other side of the political aisle saying this is political theater. This is not political theater. For me, this is serious. I spent 9.5 years as an undercover officer in the CIA. I was the guy in the back alleys collecting intelligence, passing it to lawmakers. I've seen my friends killed. I've seen assets put themselves in harm's way. And this is about protecting information, the most sensitive information the American government has. And I wish my colleagues would take this a little bit more seriously. Mr. Comey, Director Comey, excuse me. SAP, Special Access Program, you alluded to earlier, that includes SCI information. Does SCI information include HUMINT and SIGINT?
Yes.
HUMINT and SIGINT, human intelligence, information collected from people that are putting themselves in harm's way to give us information to drive foreign policy. Signals intelligence, some of the most sensitive things to understand what Al-Qaeda is doing, what ISIS is doing. So, the former Secretary of State had an unauthorized server, and those are your words, in her basement, correct?
Correct.
Who was protecting that information? Who was protecting that server?
Well, not much. There was a number of different people who were assigned as administrators of the server.
And at least 7 emails chains, or 8, that was classified as TS-SCI.
Correct.
So the former Secretary of State, one of the president's most important advisors on foreign policy and national security, had a server in her basement that had information that was collected from our most sensitive assets, and it was not protected by anyone, and that's not a crime? That's outrageous. People are concerned. What does it take for someone to misuse classified information and get in trouble for it?
Well, it takes mishandling it and criminal intent.
And so an unauthorized server in the basement is not mishandling?
Well, no, there is evidence of mishandling here. This whole investigation at the end focused on, is there sufficient evidence of intent?
Was this unanimous opinion within the FBI on your decision?
Well, the whole FBI wasn't involved, but the team of agents, investigators, analysts, technologists, yes.
Did you take into any consideration the impact that this precedence can set on our ability to collect intelligence overseas?
Yes. My primary concern is the impact on what other employees might think in the federal government.
And you don't think this sends a message to other employees that if the former Secretary of State can have an unauthorized server in their basement that transmits top secret information, that's not a problem?
Oh, I worry very much about that. That's why I talked about that in my statement, because an FBI employee might face severe discipline, and I want them to understand that those consequences are still going to be there.
Director Comey, do you have a server in your basement?
I do not.
Does anybody in the FBI have a server in their basement or in their house?
I don't know. Not.
Do you think it's likely?
I think it's unlikely.
I would think so too.
I would think
so too, because I've been proud to serve alongside the men and women that you represent. So there was no dissenting opinion when you made this decision. It's your job to be involved in counterintelligence as well. Right?
Yes.
So that means protecting our secrets from foreign adversaries collecting them. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did this activity you investigated make America's secrets vulnerable to hostile elements?
Yes.
Do you think that pattern of behavior would continue?
I'm sorry, I missed the last.
Do you think that pattern of behavior would continue?
Would continue
by our former Secretary of State?
I'm not following. You mean if this had not come to light, you mean?
Right now, based on what we see, do you think there's going to be other elements within the federal government that think it's okay to have an unauthorized server in their basement?
Well, they better not. That's one of the reasons I'm talking about.
So, but what is the ramifications of them doing that? How is there going to be any consequences levered if it's not being levered here? Because indeed, you're setting a precedent.
Yeah, the precedent, I want people to understand, again, I only am responsible for the FBI, that there will be discipline from termination to reprimand and everything in between for people who mishandle classified information.
Director Comey, I'm not a lawyer, and so I may misstate this. Is there such a thing as the case of first impression? And why was this not possibly one of those?
There is such a thing, which just means the first time you do something. The reason this isn't one of those is that's just not fair. That would be treating somebody differently because of their celebrity status or because of some other factor. Doesn't matter. We have to treat people. It's the bedrock of our system of justice. We treat people fairly. We treat them the same based on their conduct.
And that person mishandling the most sensitive information that this government can collect is not fair? It's not fair to punish someone who did that?
Not on these facts. It would be fair, that person worked for me, it would be fair to have a robust disciplinary proceeding. It's not fair to prosecute that person on these facts.
I thank
Mr. Chairman, I yield back the time I do not have.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to open by acknowledging my colleague from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows. Here he comes back in the room. For acknowledging your integrity, Director Comey. I think bipartisan sentiments like that are few and far between around here, and I appreciate Congressman Meadows' remark. You are a man of integrity, Director Comey. It's troubling to me that remark from Congressman Meadows is not unanimous at this point. It used to be. Just weeks ago, our chairman, Representative Chaffetz, stated on national TV that Republicans, quote, believe in James Comey, unquote. He said this, and I quote, I do think that in all of the government, he is a man of integrity and honesty. His finger's on the pulse of this. Nothing happens without him, and I think he is going to be the definitive person to make a determination or a recommendation. But just hours after your actual recommendation came out, Chairman Chaffetz went on TV and accused you of making a, quote, political calculation. And then our Speaker of the House, weeks ago, referring to you, Director Comey, said, I do believe that his integrity is unequaled. So your integrity it was unanimous about your integrity before you came to your conclusion, but after, not so much. That's troubling. And I want to give you a chance, Director Comey. How do you respond to that? How important to you is maintaining your integrity before the nation?
I think the only two things I have in life that matter are the love of my family and friends and my integrity. So I care deeply about both.
All right. Now, Director Comey, you discussed your team a little bit, and they deserve a lot of credit for all of the hard work and effort that went into this investigation. And I think you just said that they were unanimous, that everyone who looked at this agreed that no reasonable prosecutor would bring a case. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
How many people were on this team?
It changed at various times, but somewhere between 15 and 20, and then we used a lot of other FBI folks to help from time to time.
And how many hours were spent on this investigation?
We haven't counted yet. I said to them they put 3 years of work into 12 calendar months.
And how many pages of documents did the FBI review in this investigation?
Thousands and thousands and thousands.
And the agents doing the document review, were they qualified or were they unqualified?
They were an all-star team. They're a great group of folks.
How about Secretary Clinton? Did she agree to be interviewed?
Yes.
Come in voluntarily without the need of a subpoena?
Yes.
Was she interviewed?
Yes.
Was she interviewed by experienced, critical, veteran agents and law enforcement officers, or by some kind of credulous, gullible newbies doing their on-the-job training, Director?
She was interviewed by the kind of folks the American people would want doing the interview, real pros.
All right, you were asked about markings on a few documents. I have the manual here, marking classified national security information, and I don't think you were given a full chance to talk about those 3 documents with the little C's on them. Were they properly documented? Were they properly marked according to the manual?
No.
According to the manual, and I ask unanimous consent to enter this into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
According to the manual, if you're going to classify something, there has to be a header on the document, right?
Correct.
Was there a header on the 3 documents that we've discussed today that had the little C in the text someplace?
No, there were 3 emails. The C was in the body, in the text, but there was no header on the email or in the text.
So if Secretary Clinton really were an expert at what's classified and what's not classified, and we're following the manual, the absence of a header would tell her immediately that those 3 documents were not classified. Am I correct in that?
That would be a reasonable inference.
All right. I thank you for your testimony, Director. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Director Comey.
Morning, sir.
Thank you for being here. I also respect your commitment to law and justice and your career. And first question I want to ask you, is this hearing unfair? Has it been unfair to you?
No.
Thank you. One purpose of security procedures for classified information is to prevent hostile nations from obtaining classified information. Is that fair?
Yes.
And did hostile nations obtain classified information from Secretary Clinton's servers?
I don't know. It's possible, but we don't have direct evidence of that. We couldn't find direct evidence.
I want to, without making this a law school class, I want to try to get into intent. There are various levels of intent in the criminal law, everything from knowingly and willfully doing something all the way down to strict liability. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes.
And in Title 18, most of the criminal laws in Title 18 have the words knowingly and willfully in them, and that is the standard typically that United States attorneys prosecute under.
Most do. Unlawfully, knowingly, and willfully is our standard formulation for charging a case.
And there are also a variety of others between the knowingly and willfully standard and the strict liability standard. And many, like environmental crimes, have a much lower standard because of the toxic materials that are at risk of harming individuals. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. Let's talk about this particular statute, 18 U.S.C. 1924. I take it we could all agree, or you and I can agree on a couple of the elements. Secretary Clinton was an employee of the United States.
Correct.
And as the result of that employment, she received classified information.
Correct.
And there's no doubt about those 2 elements. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know whether the next element is 1 element or 2, but it talks about knowingly remove such materials without authority and with the intent to retain such material at an unauthorized location. So I'm going to treat those as 2 separate parts of the intent element. First of all, do you see the word willfully anywhere in this statute?
I don't.
Okay. And that would indicate to you that there is a lower threshold for intent?
No, it wouldn't.
Why?
Because we often, as I understand the Justice Department's practice and judicial practice, will impute to any criminal statute at that level with a knowingly also a requirement that you know that you're involved in criminal activity of some sort, a general mens rea requirement.
So, and you would apply that same standard to environmental crimes?
No, if it specifically says it's a negligence-based crime, I don't think a judge would impute that.
But Congress specifically omitted the word willfully from this statute, and yet you are implying the word willfully in the statute. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
So what the statute does say is knowingly remove such materials without authority. Is it fair that she knew that she didn't have authority to have this server in her basement?
Yes, that's true.
And she knew that she was receiving materials, classified information, in the emails that she received on her BlackBerry and other devices.
I can't answer. I'm hesitating as a prosecutor because it's always to what level of proof. I do not believe there's evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that she knew she was receiving classified information in violation of the requirements.
But that's not my question.
There's evidence of that.
That's my question. My question, in fairness, is did she know that she was receiving information on the servers at her location?
Oh, so I'm sorry. Yeah, of course, yes. She knew she was using her email system.
And as Secretary of State, she also knew that she would be receiving classified information.
Yes, in general.
Okay. And did she then have the intent to retain such material at an unauthorized location? She retained the material that she received as Secretary of State at her server in her basement, and that was unauthorized.
You're asking me, did she have the, and I'm going to ask you the burden of proof question in a second, but did she have the intent to retain classified information on the server or just to retain any information on the server?
Well, we've already established that she knew as Secretary of State that she was going to receive classified information in her emails. And so did she retain such information that she received as Secretary of State on her servers in her basement?
She did, in fact. There is, in my view, not evidence beyond certainly probable cause. There's not evidence beyond a reasonable doubt that she knew she was receiving classified information or that she intended to retain it on her server. There's evidence of that. But when I said there's not clear evidence of intent, that's what I meant. I could not, even if the Department of Justice would bring that case, I could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt those two elements.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank the gentleman. Now I'll go to the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I first entered Congress 3 years ago, like many freshman members, unlike many freshman members, I actually sought out this committee. I wanted to be on this committee because I wanted to tackle the challenges of good government, like working to eliminate improper payments or prevent wasteful programs duplication. Before I joined Congress, I had the privilege of serving in the Army for 23 years, and and as I tackled those challenges and in the challenges of helping reduce veterans' homelessness, I witnessed firsthand the real-world importance of improving and streamlining government operations, how even the best policies in the world will not work without proper implementation. And so when it comes to implementing true and lasting reforms that will make sure the electronic records and other records and the history of our great nation are preserved for future generations, I've done my best to approach this goal seriously. I'm focused on making sure that our nation sustains a long-term commitment to modernizing our federal record-keeping system, from improving the laws governing what needs to be collected, to ensuring our civil servants across government have the necessary tools to achieve what should be nonpartisan and a shared goal. With respect to examining the tough lessons learned from numerous record-keeping incidents that our committee has dealt with, which transcend any one agency or any single administration, my mission is clear. Make sure that we here in Congress move beyond partisan politics and engage in the serious, hard work of ensuring that the laws written in an era of pen and paper are overhauled to meet the digital challenges of the 21st century. Director Comey, the Office of Management and Budget and the National Archives and Records Administration released a memorandum known as the Managing Government Records Directive in 2012. And this directive states, and I quote, "By December 31st, 2016, federal agencies will manage both permanent and temporary email records in an accessible electronic format. Federal agencies must manage all email records in an electronic format. Email records must be retained in an appropriate electronic system that supports records management and litigation requirements, which may include preservation in place models, including the capability to identify, retrieve, and retain the records as long as they are needed." As a director of a bureau who deals with sensitive information on a daily basis, do you believe that this directive is necessary and attainable for agencies across the board within that 4-year time frame from August 2012 to December 2016?
I don't know enough to say both. I can say it's certainly necessary. I don't know whether it's achievable.
Okay. Are you familiar with the capstone approach? That's the federal, it's an approach that says that federal agencies should save all emails for select senior level employees, and that the emails of other employees would be archived for a temporary period set by the agency, so that senior employees' emails are kept forever, and those by other lower level employees are actually archived for a shorter period.
I'm aware generally. I know what applies to me and when I was Deputy Attorney General in the Bush administration.